Okay, hi Dan. How are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, looking over your bio, I guess we're going to be talking about forests today. That's the topic of the day. Before we get to your book, though, what is your background? Are you a forestry person?
I'm not. I actually come from architecture, which is most of my practical training and professional training. And I spent some time in architecture schools, but then gradually I shifted towards everything that was going on beyond the buildings. So about a decade ago, I sort of started to look into natural environments and forests. Um, Gradually realizing that they are in many ways designed. And this is how I started going into these places, understanding them in a different way, and eventually leading to writing this book.
Okay, is this sort of based off of Frank Lloyd Wright? I mean, he did incorporate natural environments into his architecture. Is it sort of akin to what he was doing?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't compare myself to Frank Lloyd Wright yet. He's the sort of towering giant of American architecture. But I think what is different from Wright's time, which would be 100 years back, would be that he would have an idea of nature that is quite different than our own. And even though we sometimes tend to think as of certain things as natural, for instance, forest environments, in reality they're not. So this was actually my first kind of realization visiting some of these industrial forests in the Pacific Northwest, which is basically how my own project sort of kicked off. So I visited these forests. If you happen to be in one of them at any point in your life, you would know that these environments are quite different than what you would imagine a forest to be, a natural forest to be. These are places in which all of the trees look the same. They're like identical twins, duplicated thousands of times. And when you go to these places, you realize that you're actually in some sort of a tree factory. And when I began to realize that many of the forests around the country look pretty much like this factory that I happen to find myself in, it became sort of interesting to consider them as artificial projects. And with that, our idea about what is nature and what is natural, is being transformed from 100 years back.
Okay, well, I suspect that those types of forests have been replanted because they were probably depleted
Of
and
course.
and replanted. There are certainly areas where the forests are untouched, although they're getting smaller and smaller. Amazon rainforest is probably the most famous one, and there are places in Alaska that haven't been deforested, right?
Actually not many, because more than 95% of the forests around the world are artificial or have been designed to a certain extent by humans. So even if we look at this, very famous examples like the Amazon forest or the Black Forest in Germany, you would see that their sort of current condition is a result of human action. So in the case of the Amazon, you would find settlements hundreds of years back actually dictating the way plants have been sort of developing, and the plant composition, the tree composition you would find today. Same with, again, Black Forest, which is basically a fabrication. It was planted 200 years ago, and today it's this sort of, almost like a symbol of natural forest in Europe. But again, this is just a narrative. It's not natural in the sense of always have been there.
Okay, I remember taking a trip to Muir Woods some time ago, and
Mhm.
I suspect that those have been there since the inception, considering that some of them were 2,000 years old. I don't think we were
Yeah,
planting at that point. In
no.
fact, I'm not even sure there were human beings in that area at that point. But what exactly is your point then? Is this a bad thing that we're doing, or a good thing, or are we fooling with Mother Nature that we shouldn't be? Or give me an idea of what the point of that you're trying to make with this.
Again, coming from architecture and spatial design, for me, this was a revelation, because once you consider that most of the forests around the world are designed to an extent, in a way it frees you, right? Because it allows you to consider why they have been designed in a certain way, whether this way is the best way. And we see these questions rising all the time. For instance, right now with the LA fires, this is a question that had been raised, in many ways around such events. And I'm saying it frees you because it allows you to imagine that you could design them in different ways, and to achieve different means. And these means could be more beneficial for communities, for instance, that live around these forests, and for other means that you could consider as part of a sort of design project.
Well, I think you would have a lot of support for that, especially in LA right now. There was a new fire that just broke out.
Yeah.
And it's burning 10,000 acres or something like that at an extreme rate. And a lot of people feel that the reason for all of these fires was actually a lack of management of the forests, that it was too dry, there was too much brush, that should have all been cleared. One could argue that by just leaving it alone caused all of this fuel to be there available for the fire when maybe it should have been cleared out. What do you think?
I think part of the problem with the LA fires is definitely about forest management and the lack of enough forest management, and this, of course, is related to budget and the entire state of California, the financial state of California right now. But I think there's another way to look at it, which is to consider large-scale design. In my research, I looked quite a lot into wind infrastructure. The issue with the fires in California is not only the fire, which is the most visible aspect, it's also about wind and how wind meets forest. And by considering that the Santa Ana winds could have been slowed down, for instance, by forest infrastructure, you could have an entirely different conversation about what is the type of infrastructure that we should have in order to mitigate some of the effects of such catastrophic events. And I would also say that this is not something that I sort of just came up with based on examples, from other places. Actually, the United States have been implementing, 80 or 90 years back. We had the Dust Bowl, and part of the tools to sort of mitigate the effects of the Dust Bowl was exactly that. So there was a huge federal project that today we would call green infrastructure, planting what is still today the largest artificial forest in the United States. That's in the Great Plains, and this had shown to slow down the wind and mitigate the effects of environmental effects of the Dust Bowl for long term.
So essentially planting a forest to create sort of a wind barrier.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting idea. So your book is called Designing Forests, A Cultural History. Have you published other books, or is this your first one?
This is my first single author books. I have published quite a bit about the subject, but not as my own book.
Okay, now is this, because I see architecture in here, and so far we've just been talking about forest management generally. How does your book incorporate what we've just been talking about with architecture?
Well, again, once I looked into this idea that natural environments are being designed, I sort of tried to reverse engineer it to see according to what ideas they are being designed. And once you look into these ideas, you find something quite interesting, which is that some of these ideas are shared by spatial designers, forest scientists, and land managers. So, for instance, the idea, let's say, of an intelligent forest, which is something that we hear quite a lot in recent years, and it really changes the way forests are being managed in some parts of the United States. But at the same time, this relates to the idea of smart environments that we see in cities. So in a way, the ideas according to which we design forests are sort of coming back to us in the way we design cities. And when we discuss things such as, let's say, urban forests, we have been using the same ideas. So these realms that are sometimes considered separate, being in a city or being in a forest, are actually connected in many ways.
If money was no object and you had the chance to design something, a building, a house, or something that incorporated this concept with the forests, how would you do it? What would you do?
Actually, I don't need to invent it because there are quite a few good examples of what you could do with forest in cities. And I think many schemes that you would find in recent decades, speaking about urban forestry, are moving in the right direction. I think, these sort of million tree schemes that you would find in New York, in Los Angeles as well, other cities around the country are definitely trying to understand what would be the effects of having many trees in urban environments. But I think at the same time, while it's hard to resist having greenscapes around your house, I think who could resist that in a way. At the same time, we need to ask what are the goals that we are aiming for when we plant an urban forest, because in most cases you would find that these kind of developments replicate development mechanisms. So the goals would be financial in a strict sense, and of course financial is quite important when you go for such a big project in a city. But at the same time, I think we need to ask what the communities that are involved in the process, that live there, would have to benefit, and they should be involved in the process. And this had not been happening enough in urban forestry schemes, and this is the potential, because a forest could give you shade, it could give you environmental mitigation, it could increase real estate values. This had proven to be the case in research. It could also be a source for food or for recreation, as long as we don't expect it to be the same as the forest that's outside the city. I think we could design it in a way that would be ideal for communities and specific for communities that live around it.
What if we stopped building houses made of wood? How would that affect it?
That's a great question. The United States have been obsessed with building with wood, right? Especially residential buildings. And in many ways, this is not so rational, I would say, because why would you build with wood, right? It's it's a natural resource, and most of us like it. I think it's a good reason, but at the same time, it tends to burn, as we've seen just now. Even the big houses in Santa Monica that cost probably tens of millions of dollars, they burned very quickly because of that. It has all of these problems with pests and other types of issues that you would find when you compare it to concrete. So really, why do that? I think historically this had happened because the United States had very strong forest companies that are sort of operating through and lobbying through the government in order to have the markets sort of in constant demand. But what we're seeing recently, I would say probably in the last 10 to 15 years, is that wood construction is sort of making a comeback as a more sort of sustainable solution, and things like mass timber are being sort of presented as more, let's say, conscious ways of handling the problems that come with construction industries when you build, for instance, with concrete or with steel. So I think it's a sort of mixed heritage. And right now, I would say that it's not such a bad idea to build with wood. It's just a question of what kind of wood and how do you do it? Where do you source your wood? How do you make it more fire resistant? How do you make it local? I think it's another interesting issue, which is both cultural and material and economic, of course. And all these kind of questions are sort of filtering in and are becoming, I think, more and more interesting and more positive in a sense of wood construction still being a viable option as we move forward.
Well, Dan, we are running out of time real quick here, so let's just recap. Your book is called Designed Forest, A Cultural History. Has the book been released?
It had been released, last month.
Last month, okay. And the last question is, do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yeah, it's handandel.com.
All right, Dan. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you, and best of luck with the book. Hope it does well.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.